Hi, I'm Mark Lieberman, owner of Nostalgic Motoring Ltd. in Auburn Hills, Michigan. We buy, sell, and work on some extraordinary automobiles of all eras and all types. I'd like to tell you a little bit about them today, but first I'm here with my friend Steve Lado, a credited author, car expert, historian, quite a resume actually.
I like to keep busy, what can I tell you?
Excellent. Well, we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the automobiles in the showroom, as well as our path towards being able to share some incredible bits and pieces of information regarding collectible automobiles and what it takes to take care of them, purchase them, sell them, and offer them to their next curator.
Yeah.
And let's get started now.
Well, and that's a funny thing. I'm an attorney, but I specialize in lemon law, and I tell people I did that specifically so I could talk to people about cars all day long. Because law, not so much. Cars all day long. So what do you got in the collection today?
Well, in the collection we have some very interesting, historically significant cars. We'll start out with a 1913 Model T Speedster. Some of the attributes of this particular example are a Columbia body, an amazing 16-valve roof head, an updraft carburetor, and some real special amenities. The amazing thing about this car, it came out of a collection. Gentleman had this in his family since 1929, and it had been in the same family's garage since the 50s. The fellow's father, who had picked it up from his cousin, had an extraordinary history in not just driving, but even racing this automobile. We've got the original leather gauntlet gloves, his leather helmet, his goggles, the racing jacket, all of these various things that were part of the history of this automobile that made it incredible. Now, here's one other thing about it, Steve, is that they actually used to drive this thing back and forth between Ionia and Jackson, Michigan. Can you imagine driving that thing back and forth?
So what years was this thing racing? You said it was a 1913 model year?
Yes, but I think they raced it in the 30s and maybe as far as even the early 40s, but certainly in the 1930s.
Okay, and so you're telling me they actually drove it on the street?
They drove it on the street after that.
And it's funny, early NASCAR, they called it stock car racing, okay, because they used to actually race stock cars, which is a radical idea. Now, if you look at cars on stock car racing, NASCAR today is nothing like stock cars. But the guy who won the very first NASCAR race drove the car to the race, raced, won, and drove it home. Okay, so the idea, it's kind of funny because it is extremely unusual to think about, but not that crazy for back then. Because, it saved them having to get like a car hauler, I guess, right?
Right, or they didn't have one.
Right, okay. The idea that the car may have been not street legal probably wasn't as big of a deal back then.
Probably not. Well, in this particular instance, it was funny because we interviewed the family, and the daughter remembered riding on the floorboard in between her mother's legs, in this tiny car.
Right.
And it's incredible because it was their transportation from time to time.
Right.
And the idea of traversing the roads, in this open wheel, no doors Speedster for a long distance in who knows what weather is pretty incredible.
Right, and once in a while I like to ask obvious questions, although I know people in the audience who are car guys know this, but I want to just ask the obvious questions because some people aren't necessarily as adept. But you called it a Model T, 1913, but when you look at it, it obviously doesn't look like a Model T. So what you're telling me basically is the running gear in the frame started out as a Model T, but everything else has been replaced on it for racing purposes.
That's correct. In the 20s, you had the option for Model Ts to purchase specialty equipment to make them racers.
Okay.
And in this particular instance, they purchased a Columbia body, and they purchased this special cylinder head and carburetor and did work on the suspension and all these various things in order to make this car a track car. And keep in mind, racing was really in its infancy then.
Right.
And this guy had the foresight at that point in time to say, you know what? motorsports. I want to drive fast.
Approximately how fast would that car go, do you think, if it was in tip-top shape, tuned well, and on a good track? How fast do you think it would go?
Well, in its stock form, that engine would produce 23, 24 horsepower.
Okay.
Screaming. And done this way with the 16-valve head and the various amenities, it was probably a 45 horsepower engine.
Okay.
And so this car, when, initially you can imagine a Model T was really good for about 35 miles an hour.
Right.
This could have been a 50-mile-an-hour car,
Wow.
and that in 50
Wow.
miles an hour would have been, I tell you, a frightening experience.
Well, yeah, especially in an open cockpit like that.
Oh, my
and,
goodness.
And especially when you're, what were they racing on back then? With these
Dirt.
Yeah, dirt. So that's the other thing. People don't remember. Well, dirt lasted in NASCAR into the 70s. They were racing on dirt until the 70s. And I know guys who said that the second they paved those tracks, it all went downhill. They're like, oh, that's for men race on dirt.
Well, another component of this is how you started the car. Well, these were all crank start cars.
Okay.
But no, that wasn't good enough for them because apparently his father got hurt several times trying to do it that way. So they used to lift this thing up, one of the or put the back wheel up on a jack, and would spin one of the rear wheels in order to get it going, put it back into neutral and set it down.
So it's like a roll start, but just in place.
In place.
Wow.
Absolutely crazy.
That's cool. So what are your plans for that car? What do you think's going to happen to it?
Well, it deserves to be seen and the story needs to be told.
Right.
So I'm sure that it will go to a museum or a well-seen collection where people can enjoy it and learn about the crazy times of the late 20s and 30s and 40s.
Right.
One of the other things that I'd like to go to the other side of the spectrum. Now we've done, the most basic rudimentary transportation. Let's go to advanced, really exceptionally technically superior vehicles now, to a jet-powered motorcycle.
Now, see, again, you're speaking my language because I wrote a book about the Chrysler turbine car.
Yes.
And turbine engines have been used in automobiles, not widely, but Chrysler had a whole program with them. And then I know that there have been turbines put in other things. But, of course, the company that puts the turbines in the bikes is still doing it, which is pretty cool.
Correct. MTT in Louisiana, extraordinary company owned by a great friend, Ted McIntyre, brilliant guy when it comes to turbine engines. And it was his brainchild to build these turbine-powered motorcycles.
Right.
The first one he built was called the Y2K, and Jay Leno owns it. Has put a ton of miles on his. And in the most recent versions, it's the 420RR, and it's powered by a Rolls-Royce turbine engine. And extraordinary, 420 horsepower, 550 pounds of torque. It's the fastest production motorcycle on the planet.
So you're telling me that motorcycle's got 10 times the horsepower of that racer that Ford put out that you've got at the other end of the building?
and weighs the same pretty much. It's 600-pound motorcycle. It's incredible.
What kind of stats, like what kind of acceleration, what kind of top speed, what kind of, the numbers have got to be off the charts on that thing.
They are. It is absolutely extraordinary. The bike will do over 250 miles an hour. They have a client in the UK that took his bike to an airfield and did the standing mile at 2:38.
That's fast.
Now, just imagine trying to hang on.
Oh yeah.
It's extraordinary. But, again, the technology that went into building this thing and the fact that it is a street legal bike that I drive around.
Yeah.
It's absolutely manageable and usable. And people say, well, how can you drive that? It's so fast. Well, there are a lot of cars that are extraordinarily fast. It just doesn't mean you have to do that.
I tell people it's like in the old days when you bought a stereo system that could go so loud as to shake the windows.
Yes.
That means it sounds better at low volume, okay? So when you've got a bike that'll do 250, okay, it means it rides better at 30 or 40. It does.
Well, I've got to tell you, the expression on people's faces when you pull up, and it sounds like a Learjet.
Yeah.
They don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I was at the Troy traffic jam with you a couple years ago, and you had the bike, and you fired it up, and you drove it around the lot.
Right.
Everything stopped. It doesn't matter. I mean, I think the DJ shut the music off. I mean, it was that everyone was stopped to hear what it was, and then when they saw it, it's like, oh, it's the jet bike, and everybody's like, watching it. I mean, it's an amazing thing to see, and I like just the dashboard on that thing.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's space age.
It is. It's all touch screen.
Yeah.
It's an incredible piece of technology that works.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that can put sophisticated things together,
Right.
and they're more of a novelty than anything else. But this actually works.
And the guy sells these. If you want to buy one of these, I understand he's not going to sell 1,000 of them next year, but the point
Correct.
is, if you want to buy one of these, the guy sells them to the public. It's a commercially available vehicle for consumers.
More so than I'm the only dealer for them. So not only do we sell them right here.
Right. Right. But I mean, the Chrysler turbine car. They built 55 of them. 46 got destroyed. Jay Leno's got one. I've driven it. Chrysler's got a couple. You and I went for a ride one day.
Exactly. We drove one.
We drove one. But the point is, there were people who wanted to buy those cars, and Chrysler goes, "We're not going to sell them.
Right.
We're not going to sell those." The point is, if you want to buy a turbine-powered motorcycle, knock yourself out. We'll sell you one.
Absolutely. Now let's jump to the topic of the turbine-powered car for a minute.
Okay.
You wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
You're the expert in these turbine-powered automobiles. What do you think actually kept that car from going into production?
People often think it was like a government conspiracy or Ford and GM shut them down. Chrysler had financial troubles. They've had financial troubles several times in their existence. And right around the time where they're thinking about should we pull the trigger and make these or not make these was, in essence, the early 70s. And if you remember the doldrums that the car companies were in at that time and Chrysler's financial trouble, that combined with the tailpipe emission standards that had just been announced because of smog and the EPA, Chrysler was told, you can build these cars, but now they've got to meet new tailpipe standards. And then internally at Chrysler, they said, if you want to build these cars, it's going to cost us $1 billion with a B to start a new building and factory just to manufacture the engines. And they're like, why should we go to all that trouble when we can just take off-the-shelf parts and put cars out that meet emissions? So it was a combining of a bunch of weird things that came along, but I think they're really cool.
Oh, they're amazing. Now,
Yeah.
you brought up the point of tailpipe emissions.
Yeah.
How about tailpipe exhaust temperature? On these jet-powered motorcycles, it's about 800 degrees.
Well, and that's one of the wives' tales you hear about the turbine cars is that, they burned the exhaust burned the asphalt. And you can walk up to it, stick your hand right in the exhaust. It's cooler than the exhaust of a regular engined car at that time. But that's because they knew they were going to have that problem. So they have this big convoluted exhaust system that goes out underneath the car. By the time it gets to the tail, it is cooled off. On a motorcycle, you can't wrap 30 feet of exhaust around because there's no place to hide it.
You cannot.
So you've got the engine right here and the exhaust is right here. And so that's one of the things that I assume you got to be careful about getting in the wash of that thing.
You don't want to stand real close to it. That's for sure. I remember going for a ride in the turbine and driving the turbine car as well with you. And it was an extraordinarily different feeling in terms of the type of acceleration that you would get out of that.
Yeah.
Also, with these turbine motorcycles, it's not at all like driving a motorcycle like you've learned to. First of all, it has a 2-speed automatic transmission.
Okay.
So there is no shifting. And in fact, first gear is good to about 70 miles an hour. So for the most part, you never see second gear anyway.
Right.
The other thing is the power delivery. When it comes on hard.
Well, and the other thing is, and this is a real subtle thing, but I noticed this in the turbine cars, is that as you accelerate, it's so smooth. And don't get me wrong, there's something nice about the rumble and the shake of like a Hemi. A Hemi idling. Bobby Isaac said it was like shaking a coffee can full of rocks. Okay, and he meant that as a compliment. But there's something so smooth and gentle about a turbine engine on takeoff. But they're putting out power. They're putting out torque. I mean, the power is there. But there's something about how it's delivered to the wheels that makes it seem different. And you realize, like, even with your ears plugged, you'd go, there's something different about this car. So I'm assuming, is that the same with a motorcycle?
It is. Well, you have to learn the bike.
Right.
Forget everything that you've learned except for balancing. And we've got a turbine-powered trike over there too that we'll show you that you can now you don't even have to remember balancing. But the idea is that it operates differently. So as a result of that, you learn how and where to apply power.
Okay.
It's very interesting. But you mentioned the Bobby Isaac story. Well, that's one of the other things that we'll talk about over there. We handle muscle cars.
Right.
Challengers. In fact, I'd like to do a whole segment just on the evolution of the Dodge Challenger,
right,
from its inception and how it came to be 1970 through 1974, and then its second series,
right,
beginning in 2008, the development of the Hellcat, then the Demon,
right,
and beyond.
So
there's some amazing things that we can talk about with muscle cars and Challengers as well.
Right. And so when we're walking through your garage, and I know you've got over there, we're going to be talking about, you got two Tuckers over there right now, don't you?
I do. I've got two Tuckers over there, and this includes, some really amazing pieces of history. I've been involved with Tuckers since I bought my first one in 1991. That was car number 6, and it set me on what appears to be a lifelong path and love affair with the Tucker story and the automobile itself. We're the only people in the world that manufacture suspensions for these, manufacture cylinder heads, do the engine rebuilds to a degree that nobody's ever done before. The idea here is that we're on a mission to preserve these 51 automobiles that were crafted largely by hand and designed to change the way the automobile industry existed at the time. Well, it's a very interesting story, and I'd like to do several segments on just portions of Tucker.
Right. Okay.
And I own car number 29, which is Preston Tucker's personal car. That was kind of the holy grail.
And it's kind of funny because I've talked to people before about your collection of the cars you have and the cars that you have for yourself versus the cars you're selling for other people. And I said, oh, by the way, he's got another Tucker. And they go, oh, it's kind of like, oh, you had another. Well, no, this is Preston Tucker's personal Tucker. And it's documented. This is the one that he himself drove.
Right.
Because, otherwise, other than the color, the cars are pretty much the same. They all have the same configuration with the engine, the transmission, all that kind of stuff. I understand you could get an optional radio, for instance. But the fact that you have the one that Preston Tucker himself drove as a personal driver has got to be pretty cool.
It's unbelievable. And as we're starting to restore the car, we're finding incredible elements of it. It had its own unique interior. Unlike all of the rest of the Tuckers out there, this car has a special, unique interior that obviously Preston had Dorothy Moore design for him. Both historically significant automobiles.
Wow.
Yeah, incredible stuff.
Yeah.
There will be many other automobiles and categories for us to discuss and move ahead with in the episodes that we're going to do. And I hope that you'll come back and take a look at this channel again, Nostalgic Motoring Ltd. And Mark Lieberman and Steve Lato. And I hope we have an opportunity to show you a lot more interesting cars in the collector world.